just give everyone a few more moments, and then we'll jump into everything.
Sounds good. Hey, what's up, everybody?
Hello, hello. How's it going, Alex?
Doing well, man. Doing well, thanks.
Good to hear as always. All right, we can jump into things then. Welcome everyone to another edition of Spill the Alpha. Appreciate you all being here. Today we have Nexus joining myself and Alex as usual. We'll be chatting a little bit about IDEX updates, and then we'll get straight into a few different questions for Nexus about news trading and kind of trading in general. So to kick things off, as is tradition, we'll have Alex touch on product updates from the IDEX side. As always, if you have any questions for both the IDEX team or Nexus, in the bottom right-hand section of your phone, there is a reply button. Just drop any questions there and we'll make sure they're answered. And with that, Alex, why don't you kick us off?
Cool. Thank you, Victor. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Spill the Alpha. So from our end on the development side, last couple of weeks have been pretty big in terms of kind of milestones and accomplishments. As I've said, every time on these calls, we've got all the different pieces built in isolation, and we've been working to integrate them and put them together to make sure everything's working as expected. And as we do so, we do testing, we do, a bunch of automated testing, a bunch of unit tests, as they're called, where we make sure everything is spitting out the output that's expected. And we can slowly start to cross things off as done unless something else comes up elsewhere in the system that forces us to make changes to those different components. And happy to report that last week we hit a milestone with the smart contracts. So the smart contracts are 100% done with 100% test coverage. You can think of this as kind of the on-chain brain of the application. So this validates, it holds customer funds in terms of the USDC collateral, and then it validates every order that's placed, every trade in open position, every closed position, every liquidation, etc. Make sure that they were actually approved by the private keys that made those deposits, and make sure that, for example, index price actually went to that observed price if there's a liquidation involved. So it's kind of the on-chain confirmation that everything that was done in the exchange was a legit, valid transaction. So happy to say it's 100% done, 100% test coverage, and we received the 3 audits have all returned. We've incorporated the feedback from those auditors, and there's nothing at the moment, nothing left to be done on the smart contracts. On the audit front, all 3 auditors came back with only a handful of relatively minor issues. So if you've never done an audit, they give you issue ranks by low, medium, high, critical. Happy to report we had only a handful of low and a couple medium issues from each of the auditors. That means essentially those are in some cases design decisions, even things that are not putting funds at risk, certainly things that we want to change and want to improve, and we've done so. We've incorporated that feedback into the smart contracts, but just wanted to give a shout out to our dev team because it's a testament to the quality of code that they put out there to the auditors that the issues that were found were relatively minor. The second big development is that the trading engine has reached a similar state. It's 100% done with 100% test coverage. And you can think of the trading engine as the off-chain brain of the application. So everything that users do on the platform that involves trading flows through the trading engine. So this includes placing orders, matching trades when those orders overlap, any cancellations of orders, liquidations, etc. It's kind of as I said, the brain that's powering the actual trading on the platform. So having that complete as well is a huge milestone. This trading engine kind of coordinates with the smart contracts, if you will, think of them as the on-chain brain and the off-chain brain. And then everything else, the UI, the API, is really about communicating with those 2 different key components. So to have that 100% done with 100% text coverage is huge. It means we don't have any major new functionality that we expect to include into the trading system. And we're really now just kind of wrapping up those pieces on the edges. Last update is around the API side. So if you're familiar with API development, there's essentially 2 components, the REST API and the WebSocket API. The REST API development is done, and the WebSocket subscriptions are, for the most part, up and running. So another big milestone as we get really close to finalizing this thing. So yeah, we've been doing internal testing this whole time, but we're reaching the point where we're reviewing the UI in detail and going to start opening it up to more people internally to really start banging on this thing before we get to the public test net. Lastly, we put out a short tweet thread yesterday capturing some of this information, some of this news, and with an updated timeline estimate. So it's the kind of the TLDR is we think it's likely we'll be able to launch the public test net in the next month. However, so sometime late September, but nothing's guaranteed. We're really taking it week by week at this point. So the best way to see where we are is just to keep tuning into these things or ask us questions in Discord. Always happy to chime in. And that's it from my end.
Awesome. Good stuff. Looks like we're getting closer every single week. So make sure you're in Discord. Make sure you're keeping up to date, and we'll have the whitelist process out very, very soon to get you guys all prepped and ready for the public testnet release. All right, Nexus. You ready to jump into things?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. How are you doing, man?
I'm good, yeah. How about you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Thanks for asking. So I think the best way for us to get started is maybe just with a little bit about yourself and your background, how and why you got into trading and why you're here today.
For me, it started out, as I'm sure it started out with a lot of people, just kind of getting into trading when everything was kind of kicking off in like early 2020, and just being bored at home and stuff. And I started out in TradFi, and basically just I sucked at it basically, and lost money, made
So
money
what specifically in
occasionally, but
TradFi did you trade?
uh, pretty much everything. Like I mostly trade just purely off the chart, but also was trading just random random stuff like just biotech stocks and things with volatility really. But basically ended up with me just mostly losing money, and had no clue what I was doing. And then, like, I think at first I was trading on Robinhood, and I saw that uh, there was a lot of uh, just volatility in crypto, and so I just started like wondering why am I trading this when I could trade uh, crypto, and so I started getting into that, and yeah, I've been trading full time since I think end of 2021. Yeah, yeah, end of 2021, but something like that.
That makes sense. Awesome. So how would you describe your trading style? Are you mostly trading news, or are you like executing other strategies right now as well?
Well, I trade. Right now, I'm mostly doing on-chain stuff because the
All
market
right, makes
is
sense.
pretty pretty dead at the moment. Seems like to me since like Bybit kicked off all the Americans. And yeah, I trade mostly news as that's kind of my main profit generator, along with on-chain lately, because news trading has been not as good as it usually is the past few
Hmm.
months. But yeah, I also do a lot of scalping, not as much lately, but yeah, just usually scalping like the 1 minute, 5 minute chart. But yeah.
Gotcha. So diving into a little bit more about news trading, since that's what the space is about, can you walk us through a little bit about like your process and what it looks like, and maybe how you execute trades based on some of these headlines?
Uh, for me, it was mostly seeing. Uh, it kind of started out with me seeing news that I was late to,
Hmm.
and I was like, okay, well, there's got to be a way that I can like take advantage of this fully, because there would be good news, and then it would like obviously the price would go up. So I started figuring out how like I could get the fastest news, and just kind of cultivating or curating a good list of Twitter accounts that I have on notifications. I get like probably a few thousand notifications a day, so it's pretty wild. But yeah, it was basically just watching news that I missed out on and seeing the effects that they had, and then I started to try to trade those, and did quite well because usually it's pretty easy to know like whether you long or short, and yeah, the thing that's more difficult is, and I mentioned this in the article, but it's much more difficult to know like how much you can get out of a move. Uh, so like, for example, recently there was the Doge rocket thing,
Hmm. Hmm.
where it basically just went up and down immediately, uh, and something like 3.5%. Uh, I thought it would actually do more, but yeah, it's really just a trial and error that you start to get a feel um, for how much you can get out of news, which news stories are going to pump the most, and which stories you should just kind of fade.
That makes sense. What do you think are some of the biggest things to try to avoid when pursuing, the news trading strategy?
Coinbase news.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure it's constantly leaked, because it almost always just dumps immediately.
that makes sense. And any other kind of like, have you had like massive losses that have taught you lessons through news trading?
Um, Less massive losses through news trading. Like when started getting into crypto, my biggest thing was just risk management that I needed to get a
Hmm.
handle on. And I think that's also with news trading, uh, why I've kind of fallen into that. Uh, because it gives you a very, as long as you stick to the kind of the core principles of news trading, you have very little risk. Uh,
Yeah, the risk reward is definitely skewed in your favor.
Absolutely, because the move there's some news like recently with the BlackRock stuff that was delayed a few days, and that was quite tough to deal with. And just thinking like, okay, it's got to move from this, but it's not, and then uh, you kind of like stay in the trade too long or something like that. But yeah, the sorry, I got off track, but yeah, basically just managing the risk and uh, really just accepting you're wrong quickly
Hmm.
is what I've learned mostly from getting wrecked a bit on certain things. Like, uh, for example, things where I would think that, oh, this has to do something to the price, and so I would stay in the trade for too long, um, thinking that, oh, I have to be right, and when really the market was just telling me, no, you're not, and I wasn't really listening. That's probably the biggest thing.
For sure, that makes sense. I think that's something that traders executing all types of strategies really struggle with, right? Like cutting losses and admitting you're wrong, because it's such a difficult thing to do as a human being, ultimately in any scenario. But it's just trading is the the one that will cost you the most, generally speaking.
Absolutely, yeah. There was it was from a book that I read on something with trading psychology, um, and it was talking about how like everything else you do in life kind of does the opposite of preparing you for trading because you kind of try to optimize for being right in life, but
Right.
in trading you have to just optimize for quickly accepting that you're wrong all the time.
Yeah, 100%. I think I know what you're talking about. I think there's an excerpt where, everything in life, starting from very early primary school teaches you how to win and strive kind of for winning, but nothing really teaches you how to lose necessarily unless you like play competitive sports or do something similar like that. I think that's why a lot of the successful traders had, quite a lot of time spent gaming and they kind of have learned how to deal with losses a lot better than I think the average person. And I think like one of the most important criteria for a trader is really how to deal with losing. And like it's really another way to think of risk management, right? It's not just how much you risk you're putting on the trade, but it's what to do when, you know, your conscious brain's starting to tell you like, oh no, you know, just hold on to this trade for a little bit more. It's okay, it'll turn around.
And also it kind of compounds itself because you might be like slightly in the red or something from your trade, especially if you've sized improperly, and then so you have the thing of like wanting to be right, and then also not wanting to take the loss, and like it the whole like it's not real until you or the yeah the losses aren't real until you sell is kind of damaging, I think, because it can like for me, I just view it as like wherever my P&L is, it I just accept that as my current balance for sure, uh, without thinking like, oh, it's not a loss until I sell, because that that can, at least for me, lead me into like the whole like bag holding
Right.
mindset of like, oh, I can be right, and then this loss won't be real, and it'll actually be a win. But it's not a good mindset, at least for me.
No, for sure.
And I think I remember that sports analogy. I think John Rambo, the like chatting
Hmm.
with traders or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so we have some questions coming in the chat here. One from Reese. How do you deal with fake news?
Um, I think it depends on the source. If and I think GCR actually mentioned this a long time ago. That it might not have been GCR. I'm not exactly sure, but somebody did, and it was about how it doesn't really matter if it's from a source that like is trustworthy. So like if not to throw him under the bus, like purely hypothetical, if TV were to tweet out completely wrong news that was bullish on some coin, uh, I would trade it as if it was real. Then it to me like I would probably, depending on how believable it was, I might have my doubts, but I would still long it, and probably cut quicker than I would if I had believed it was real. But it's purely about, to me, it's about uh, the attention impact, kind
Right,
of,
it's more about like
and
the
also other
interpretation
people.
of news rather than the news itself.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's not about what you think; it's about what the market as a whole thinks. And if a trustworthy news source is tweeting out news that's completely wrong, then yeah, sure, I'll long it or short it.
Right, that makes sense. So I have another chat, or I have another question here in the replies from Manuel. Do you recommend any news aggregators, and how do you avoid being late on a trade?
Um, so for news aggregators, Tree News is quite good. I think it's delayed. I use that less than Twitter, mostly just because I've spent a long time curating my own like Twitter feeds stuff. Uh, and I could probably drop that in a tweet later on today or something. Just the list of accounts that I follow and have on notifications. But the main thing is that uh, yeah, I think that Tree News is good. I think it's delayed a bit for like blogs, if I remember correctly. Like it might be a 5 second delay unless you pay, but most of the news comes from Twitter anyways. And so that's a decent jumping off point. And then to avoid being late, um, it really depends on the quality of the news. Not necessarily quality as in uh, like how reputable it is, more so in the the expected effect that it'll have, and that kind of comes back to where I mentioned about how you can just sort of get a feel for what kind of impact a piece of news might have over time.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I can necessarily like teach that. It's kind of just learned experience.
Right.
But mainly just looking at the chart. just like pull up the 1 minute chart, 1 second if you really want, and then kind of just seeing how much has it moved already, and yeah, judging based off of just the previous move, and you kind of get a feel for how early or late you are. Um, I view it as kind of like a information pipeline, and kind of you have to know where you are in that, and it's kind of a separate thing, but you have to really choose carefully who you have on notifications and who you like trade off of, because there's certain accounts that um, you kind of I'm not going to call anybody out specifically, but there's certain accounts that will post late news as if it's breaking, and I pretty much immediately block them if they do that. I have like 2 strike policy. Um, if if there's late news that's being reported as breaking, um, especially if it's like really late, then it's just like, okay, that's just pretty egregious.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know what you're doing. Um, and yeah, so curating your news feed and looking at the chart and judging how much of the move has already happened.
Okay, yeah, that's a great segue into another question and replies here is, how do you manage notifications to make sure that you don't get oversaturated?
I don't really. Uh, like I'm constantly getting notifications. Like I think since the space has started, I've gotten over 100.
Oh my God.
And that's just because like mentioned before, like the news tradings or just trading in general is kind of muted at the moment. So kind of spread a bit more thin than I would
Mm-hmm.
like to be. Just trying to catch any piece of news that's good to trade. Um, and I definitely wouldn't recommend doing that. Like somebody that is getting into news trading, because when you start to do that, you start trading less juicy pieces of news, and it's a lot easier to
Yeah, it's a
become with
slippery
less
slope for
exit
sure.
liquidity. Yeah. Um, but yeah, just curating if you especially if you aren't doing this full time, like just put on a few accounts, and I'll put them in a like separate section of the list of traders or the list of news feeds that I look at, like the kind of must follow. And you put those ones on, and those are pretty high hit rate in terms of whether their tweets are going to make you money or not.
That makes sense. Yeah, for me, I think I mostly just have DB and Zoomer, and those are like my,
Yep.
my core sources. And then like beyond that, I'm very kind of skeptical and careful around any other headline. I've been burned a lot as a as I was experimenting with trading headlines in the past, and so I've tried to really curate it as minimal as possible. So
Yeah, absolutely. Those are, I agree. Those are probably the two best. There's a few others that I'm thinking of, but I can't think off the top of my head. But yeah.
So what sort of like execution environment are you working with to make sure that you're able to jump on headlines as soon as possible? Are you like trading straight off of like the web UI, or do you have like a third party terminal, or are you like using a custom API solution?
Um, is a much worse answer than I would like, but the one I've got for now. I trade off of my iPad, uh, just off of because I'm usually it kind of gives me the flexibility to be wherever.
Right,
I don't
right.
have to run to my desk or anything. I've just got my iPad with it's the big iPad Pro or whatever, with the keyboard and the trackpad. Um, and so yeah, it I travel a lot as well, so that lets me trade from basically wherever. If I see
No,
a
that's
headline,
an
I
amazing
can
answer.
hop in there quickly.
It's a clear answer to the fact that you don't need 6 monitors to trade well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just my iPad, and I'll have like for anybody that has an iPad, like uh I'll have the Exchange open in the primary like Safari window, and then Twitter in the little like slide over window, and yeah, that's about it for now.
Awesome.
Sometimes I'll be at my desk, but yeah.
Okay, cool. So I was just thinking about this actually last day and the last day and a half, really, as we kind of prepared to have this spaces. And I thought it would be pretty interesting discussion to have. But what sort of competition do you see in kind of the dynamic between automated news traders and kind of more like manual discretionary news trading that like someone like you pursue? Like I think for me, I've always seen the discretionary side as having quite a bit of an edge based on the fact that headlines are interpreted by humans and can be interpreted really in a variety of different ways. But ultimately, I also think that the automated traders, that this competition between themselves, and it's really an interesting dynamic between like game theory and executing fast, as well as being kind of like pulling out at the right time as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, I view it kind of like it's almost two separate games because I'm really not like as a discretionary trader. I'm not going to beat the headlines on like Elon tweets or something like that. And I tend to stay away from them. Just because it's so saturated with so many people having bots
Hmm.
pointed at Elon's tweets and even his likes at this point. And yeah, so sometimes I'll try to uh, you can even kind of like take advantage of that because they'll get in quickly, but they might not get out that quickly. Um, and so you can like a bot headline or a very botted headline, you can this is a bit more dangerous as well, especially somebody starting out. But you can short good news or good news like Elon tweeting about Doge or something like that. Uh, and yeah, kind of take advantage of the automated traders. And yeah, I kind of also view it like when there's news that's a bit more uh, with a bit more meat to it. You can kind of treat it like for anybody that trades on chain, certain like very hyped coins will be sniped pretty heavily, and there's a pretty characteristic chart of a coin that's been sniped a lot. Like it'll pump up immediately in the first 5 minutes, and then uh, kind of a sell-off down, just and then you can kind of yeah, you can get back in after the immediate bots have gotten out, and then uh, ride the pump if it's a longer lasting, uh, more substantial headline.
That makes sense. So how often do you think you fade headlines once they reach exhaustion versus basically just taking profit? Like how often are you playing both sides?
I used to more, but I've just kind of I'm quite happy with the returns I'm getting from just longing with the direction of the sentiment on the news or the shorting with it. And sometimes I will if it's particularly volatile periods, but lately it's just been, like I said, quite muted, and um, oftentimes it's just I don't find it that worth it. In different market conditions, it definitely can be,
Hmm.
but also more dangerous as well. 'Cause if you misjudge, uh, but yeah, mostly just go with the direction of the news, at least for now.
That makes sense. Were there any resources that you used to, like during your journey as a trader to learn some of the strategies you're employing now, or was it all just like trial and error and fucking around and finding out?
Yeah, it almost exclusively fucking around and finding out. Did a lot of that for a while. Like yeah, I've searched as well, and there's really maybe I'm just haven't searched well enough, but there's barely any resources on trading the news at all. And yeah, so that was almost entirely just trial and error, and realizing that it can be much more like much more consistent profits that way versus uh, most other types of trading, really, at least for me.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think there's definitely more edge left right now for discretionary traders, again, because of that skewed RR in news trading, as opposed to using specific indicators or even like really basic things like support and resistance, just based on the fact that those sort of trading strategies are so oversaturated and have so many false signals, given the fact that I think a lot of players are looking at the exact same area that you're looking at, and it's very, very easy to make you think that a signal is much stronger than it really is. Whereas I think with news trading, like one of the things that I see is again that skewed RR, and like if you're able to have the discipline to admit you're wrong early and quickly, you'll always have that opportunity of the next headline giving you kind of a similar scenario with a skewed risk to reward, right? And like as long as you kind of stick to good headlines, you stick to your discipline of cutting things early. I think you constantly have chances to make positive P&L.
Absolutely. And I think that was actually part of it, what you mentioned about uh, always having a chance on the next headline. That actually really helped me with my discipline, because like I think most traders starting out, that was probably the thing I was lacking the most. Just yeah, discipline and risk management. But when there's just constant headlines where you can make 2% here, 3% here, 5% here, 15% here, uh, there's really no need to be like, oh, like this is going to be the big one. I'm very happy now with just getting small trades consistently, a few a day sometimes, and not really chasing or uh, holding too long just because of that. So there's just constant opportunity.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think like, and this is something newer traders especially struggle with, but when you're not in a trade, you see an abundance of opportunities and almost too many opportunities based on the fact that you're really eager to enter something. But when you're in a trade, you think that's the only trade you have, and it's very hard to remind yourself
Yeah,
that there's always another trade. There's always a next trade, right? Like when you're in a position, that thing's your baby, right? And I think having that sort of bias tied to it, it takes a long time to remove. Like personally, it took me years of trading before I was finally able to completely dissociate from any sort of positions that I had open and really always focus on thinking about the next trade rather than the one I'm in.
absolutely. And that like, uh, yeah, you've been trading for longer than I have, so even still, like I still have that that feeling of like being in the trade, and like you said, it's like your baby. And for me, like I haven't necessarily gotten rid of that feeling, but I know myself and my emotions well enough to know that I shouldn't listen to that. Um, and that's actually like kind of a side note. I think a lot of people say that you should become like this emotionless robot when you're trading. But I really disagree. I think that you should really like reflect on your emotions while you're trading, and how does it make you feel when you're down 1%? How does it make you feel when you're up 10%, uh, or up even more? And and really get a good grasp on just the emotional roller coaster that we go through every day as traders. And by understanding it, you can really harness it, in my opinion. You don't necessarily need to get rid of those emotions, but they can actually give you quite good signals. Quite often, I'll recognize a feeling that I felt in the past, and act on that
Hello.
in a way that would have saved me in the past.
Hello, hello. Sorry about that. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, apologies, my connection dropped.
Oh no.
Cool. So I think you've spilled quite a lot of alpha, to be honest. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of give in terms of advice for newer traders, or any other kind of alpha you'd like to spill? Maybe a bit of on-chain advice.
Um, On-chain advice is really, it's quite tough because there's kind of so many different lanes that you can kind of go into. Uh, the main thing is just finding a like good hungry group of people that yeah just uh, I'm not the best at finding the new coins, things like that, so I rely a lot on the people around me. Um, but yeah, oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, my left AirPod died. Uh, but yeah,
No,
really just finding good groups of people to be around. Yeah, that's the main thing for on-chain, I think.
cool. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think on-chain is actually one of the places left where I think being in a group is much more helpful than something like trading majors and altcoins, given that I think really altcoins is and really majors and perps in general is a game against yourself, whereas I think on-chain is still a little bit more PvE, um, depending on kind of the market cap you're playing within. And I think ultimately, like being part of a team and it's more of like a research game than a trading game, really, right? And sort of being early is kind of the key there, and kind of working together helps a lot. So that's definitely great advice.
Yeah, mo not I wouldn't at the moment I wouldn't necessarily say that I think it's PvE, just because like there's not really new money coming in at the moment. I think it's more group PvP,
Yeah,
almost
that's definitely a better way to put
kind
it.
of a Guild Wars thing, uh, and yeah, shoot, I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Before we wrap up, Alex, do you have any questions for Nexus? Any other thoughts to wrap it up?
No, no thoughts from my end. I just I love hearing the experience. I think there's a temptation for all of us in crypto to try to be news traders because we're all online and seeing these things come in and just hearing the level of dedication that goes into doing this well. Um, you know, it's I already knew I didn't really have an edge there as I'm trying to work the day job and seeing these things a bit late, but just knowing that there's someone out there who's devised a whole production and strategy around it is just really interesting to hear. Some of the stories about how you can become good at that craft.
Thank you, man. Yeah,
Awesome. Yeah,
and I do think that I do think there is uh, not necessarily like not necessarily right now, but when the market is a bit more easy mode, I'd say I think there's a lot of edge even for people doing it like part time, because really like if you're only doing it 3 hours a day, maybe you miss out on uh, 20 different headlines that happened in the other 21 hours of the day. But if you get a good headline in those 3 hours, then as long as you've got the framework down, you can still do it. Uh, Maybe not necessarily just as well as somebody that's doing it all day, but I do think there's a lot of juice to squeeze, even for people doing this part time.
definitely. Yeah, I think it all comes down to the process and crafting a system that is, something that you can replicate throughout the day. And as long as you're available whenever there's a headline that comes in that's juicy enough, you can definitely execute on it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Nexus, thank you so much for coming by and stopping by and dropping a lot of alpha. I'm hoping that all the listeners were able to absorb that, and I'm hoping that it's going to help them out with their trading. Alex, as always, thanks for stopping by and dropping some product updates. And finally, thank you to everyone who listened in. Really appreciate you guys stopping by. And we'll catch you on the next Spill the Alpha. Make sure to join Discord for all the latest launch updates. And keep in mind that the public testnet will be dropping very, very soon. Have an amazing day, guys. Thank you so much.